Iranians across the country are struggling to afford basic necessities. To give you an idea of just how bad things are, an average worker earns about $120 per month, while official estimates suggest you would need a minimum of $500 a month to survive for a family of three. Now, the Iranian currency is plummeting once again, dropping to a staggering low of just over 1 million rials to the US dollar. That's a loss of more than half its value since President Masoud Pezeshkian took to office in August. Now, the big question, are we starting to see the early signs of Iran's economy collapsing? Is this a result of the maximum pressure policy? And what does this mean for the future of Iran's clerical establishment? To help answer these questions, we're joined by Mohamad Machine Chian, a senior researcher at the Center for Governance and Markets at the University of Pittsburgh, and Mahdi Ghodsi, an economist at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies.
It is a real tragedy. There's no way around it.
The situation is very dire. Muhammad calls it tragedy. I call it dark comedy.
I'm Negar Moshahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Mahdi Ghodsi in Vienna and Mohamad Machine Chian in Pittsburgh, thank you both for being here with us. Let's start off with the dire economic crisis in Iran. Now, here at Iran International, we often get messages and phone calls and video messages from the people of Iran. And I'm just going to read out a quote from a government employee in Iran. A decent woman's suit costs at least 150 to 180 million rials, which is about 159 to 191 dollars. My salary is 102 million rials, which is about 109 US dollars. And 70 million of that, so $74, goes to rent. How can I buy new clothes when I can barely afford food? Now, of course, it's Nowruz, the Persian New Year holiday, and Iranians are really struggling. Let's put the plunging rial into perspective here, which is just over 1 million per dollar. Mohamad, let's start with you. Your reaction, first of all, to that quote, and what does this record low rial mean for Iranian people, just everyday people?
Absolutely. The way I would characterize it is that it is a real tragedy. There's no way around it. And Iranian people have been, their purchasing power, their quality of life have been steadily dropping for the past couple of years. But especially the past year has been a disaster. And unfortunately, there's no policy in place. There's no plan at work in countering that situation, in reforming that situation, in improving the situation. So, unfortunately, this tragedy, and it is, believe me, it's very difficult because me personally, for example, I've been following Iran's economy for the past 20 plus years. And so it has been my job to follow the economy. But especially in the past few years, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to follow it, to analyze it. And so even for me, and I'm living in the free world and I have a relatively comfortable life, but even following that situation is difficult. Imagine living that situation. Uh, and Again, unfortunately, there is no light at the end of this tunnel, which is a shame, by the way, because President Pezeshkian had so many opportunities, and before him, President Raisi as well. Both of them, they had so many opportunities to change this dynamic, to change the situation, and of course, Supreme Leader, he has had dozens of opportunities in the past 35 years. Nonetheless, they have other priorities. They continue to follow those priorities, and the welfare and the quality of life, the purchasing power of average, ordinary Iranians doesn't seem to be even on their radar, let alone a priority.
Now, what were some of those opportunities? Can you describe it to us? And what are their priorities, if you could remind our audience?
Oh, absolutely. At least the most recent one was the President Pezeshkian had an opportunity to put together the next year's budget. And of course, his inauguration was a disaster. After that, they lost the. He could have, because, for example, President Rouhani, he refused to invite Ismail Haniyeh, terrorists of Hamas and Hezbollah and so forth. He consciously decided not to invite them. President Pezeshkian could do the same. He didn't. He made it into a Hamas campaign, his inauguration. And of course, it went awry very fast. But even that aside, he could have put together a reasonable budget. He could have convinced basically the Islamic Republic islands of power, as we call them. He could have convinced them that at least for a year, let's stop increasing military budgets. It would have de-escalated. Absolutely, it would have contributed to a de-escalation of the situation as well. He had. He could have justified it. He could have convinced the supreme leader and others. Uh, Nonetheless, he prioritized military budgets over the welfare of the Iranian people. And it is very clear when you look at the budget, it's very clear that this situation, basic necessities, was not even on his radar. Let me give you an example. Last Persian year, they spent about 18 billion euros on basic necessities. But last year, that was reduced to about 13 billion dollars, US dollars, 18 billion euros, billion US dollars. So you see a very sharp decline in their expenditure in basic necessities. This is during a crisis. He should have prioritized this basic necessity, the budget for basic necessities, but he prioritized IRGC. That, I think, in my opinion, is a lost opportunity. Absolutely.
And Matti, your thoughts on what Mohammed just presented, and how would you describe Iran's economy, and what's the trajectory here? Like, where do you expect to see this going? Give our audience an idea of, we know the economy is bad, but just how bad is it really?
So it's the worst situation, it's the worst condition, the direst condition that Iran has ever experienced in the past, let's say 50 years, that with Islamic Republic, even during the 8 years of Iran-Iraq war, Iran had a better economy than today. The reason behind is multifaceted in different factors. One of the factors is, of course, the budgetary issues and what Muhammad explained, the reliance on a military economy or a war economy that boosts its budget on military spending. But it's not only that. So if you consider the consumer price index that has been growing since 2019, the January 2019, it was the time actually President Trump, in his first term, initiated a maximum pressure against Iran. So since then, the inflation of the consumer price index has been on average per year was 39% or 40%. If you check, so it was only 6 years up to now. If you check all 6 other years before that, prior to that, the average annual inflation was about 18, 19%. So it tells us that prices were increasing much more than before or double than before. But at the same time, the salaries and incomes of people who were employed by the government or who were employed by other companies that were receiving minimum wages or above that, their salaries increased per year maybe by 20%, 25%. So if you check and compare the situation of their income after these 6 years, you would understand that prices of commodities and general prices in the country have increased by sevenfold, while their income has increased only by threefold. So that the difference is a lot, a huge amount of reduction in their purchasing power. So if they were consuming, I don't know, 100 kilos of meat per year for a family, now they are consuming only 30, 40 kilos, according to these statistics. So the situation is very dire. Muhammad calls it tragedy. I call it dark comedy. It's a comedy because the people who are officials, who are the leaders of Iran, from its supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei to all its presidents, they are they are mingling in a situation of lack of policy because they don't have any policy because they have only one objective. The objective is to survive, and to survive, they need to initiate wars. They need to increase tensions with other countries so that they can deflect the attention from domestic concerns to foreign concerns. So if that is the objective, then there is no other objective. There is no other economic or welfare objective that they can improve in several years or within policies. So I explained this to just give you a snapshot. And if you compare it with Western countries like United States or European Union, think about the prices, the inflation that we were experiencing post COVID. It was 10%, 15% in many Western economies, and many understood it, and they felt being hurt. So imagine 4 to 6 years of high inflation without your income being adjusted.
Yeah, and even if you compare Iran to neighboring Iraq, while the average Iranian is making at most $100 a month, in Iraq they're making at least $1,000 per month. So do we know, since President Trump was elected into office, how much of the real has actually come down? I mean, you touched on maximum pressure there, Matty.
Yeah, so if you compare it since if you compare real since President Trump being elected, it's about 25% that it has been being depreciated, and it was just 2 months. If you compare it with the beginning of the previous year, which was March 20th, 2024, it was 66% depreciation of real. It means that if people were dependent on the imports of uh, necessities or primary commodities like meat, um, other products like even oil, wheat, all of these prices should have increased. The prices of these commodities should have increased by at least 66%. But the increase was even much more than that because real was depreciating, and at the same time, um, global commodity prices was increasing. So it was a uh, double sword for Iranians who are living in Iran and who are dependent on imports.
Now, let's talk about exports, oil exports specifically. President Trump has vowed to reduce Iranian oil exports down to zero. My first question is that even feasible? And most recently, Trump has sanctioned a Chinese refinery for buying Iranian oil. Obviously, one of the first signs of the maximum pressure campaign. Mohammed, how does this impact the real?
Well, the reality is, first of all, you're asking if it is feasible. Uh, if you're asking if it is feasible for the free world, for America, for example, to do that, and you're talking about the impacts of complete sanction on Iran's oil on the basically global price of oil, yes, it's absolutely feasible. Iran has been kicked out of the equation long ago. And of course, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that became an issue. And President Biden's administration, they allowed Iran to increase oil exports to counter that. So what I'm saying is there was other contributing factors to the equation, but President Trump absolutely can enforce that policy, and the world economy will survive or will most likely tolerate that. But for Iran and people living in Iran, it will impact Iran's economy greatly. And I should preface this perhaps by saying that currently, at the rate they are exporting oil, basically the oil revenue is barely sufficient for pension funds. Basically, the pension funds are showing great losses. And if you want, we can get into that. It's uh, another tragedy, another disaster, I should say. Nonetheless, it's barely sufficient to pay for the pension funds, the pay-as-you-go Bismarckian pension funds. Uh, but even that aside, the reality is basically Islamic Republic tries to stabilize the price of basic goods and services by throwing money at it. And in order to do that, they need US dollars. And when they cannot sell oil, they don't have their foreign currency reserves in US dollar. When it is decreases, they no longer can continue those policies. When they cannot continue those policies, a number of things happen. Uh, First, the inflation jumps. The real U.S. dollar exchange rate jumps, spikes, I should say, and the price of everything goes up. Uh, Government no longer can subsidize many things that they have been subsidizing for decades anymore. And President Pezeshkian's priority have been to reduce those subsidies without really alarming people. But people are noticing because especially all of these things are happening at the very same time. So you mentioned at the beginning the real situation for average Iranians. This can make that situation even worse. It can compound that situation, and I'm afraid that is exactly what's going to happen in this year.
Now, would this actually lead to Iranian people rising up against the Iranian government? Like, I realize that this is obviously the point of the foreign policy to make something like that happen. I'd like to get both your guys' thoughts on this.
Following what Mohammed said, actually, the Iranian oil is very important, but it is not distributed equally across all Iranians. So it's about maybe 18-20% of GDP in the previous year. Um, I mean, the year that was ending in March 20th, 2024, about 20% of the total GDP of the economy was through the sales of oil. But average households did not earn anything out of that because the revenues from oil was distributed for other priorities of the Islamic Republic, as Muhammad earlier mentioned, to military spending, to the propaganda machines, and also to suppression of the society. So there's a huge amount of budget and spending on suppression apparatus of the Islamic Republic. And whenever the society wants to show discontent and they want to demonstrate on the streets, they show their iron fist. And that's the thing that stops the society from showing uh, societal disobedience or protesting. But the situation is always uh, changing with a great dynamics if the situation is very dire and if different shocks affect the society differently. So in I think it was 2018 or 19 that there was a change in oil prices, gasoline prices, and then there was an eruption. There was a
Bloody November.
uprising of yeah, there was an uprising of society, and after that, there was another issue which was about killing of Masa Amini in the custody of the police. So these two things are two different phenomenon. One was economic, another one was societal. So anytime there's a shock to the society, it pushes them to the street to demonstrate against the policies of the regime. But because the regime is so harsh, they there's a fear of doing that again and again. So if again an economic shock happens, we are not sure if the same thing happens. So it could be another type of shock, like a military intervention by a foreign power like Israel or the United States that could induce a shock and pushes the society to the streets again to stop the war for that. So I said this because I wanted to tell you that not necessarily stopping oil purchases would push the people to the streets. But if it does, if any kind of shock push the people to the streets, then they need a leader. It needs to be a leadership. There needs to be a leadership to mobilize them, to organize them, to make them peaceful, to reduce the violence as much as possible, so that it can end or lead to something meaningful or change of the policies of the Islamic
And
Republic.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt you. If not oil exports, then what would be the most effective?
So we believe as economists, we believe that Iranian economy is hugely dependent on the exports of oil. Of course, it will lead to higher prices, higher inflation. But as we experienced at the time of Raisi about 2 years ago in the spring, because they removed the preferential exchange rate, there was an eruption of prices of by 100%, 200% for certain commodities. So it was food that was the most affected uh, commodity there. Oil prices, for instance, oil for food, it increased by 100% within 1 month. But nothing happened. So people did not go to the streets anymore because there was a recent suppression for the woman life freedom movement, and they didn't do that anymore.
Your thoughts, Mohammed?
Uh, Mahdi described it very well. It's difficult to add anything to that. But the way I would describe it is that there's a great rift between Iranian people and the regime of Ayatollahs in Iran. And as Mahdi mentioned, this has different aspects to it. Of course, there is an economic aspect that has been, as mentioned, a contributing factor to protests before, and as well as societal and other cultural issues with the regime. Because they don't recognize basically the Iranian culture and its values, and that creates a constant friction between people and the regime. Nonetheless, uh, probably the next, at least, protest con- with economic contribution, I would say would be the next price increase in the price of gasoline, which is on the menu in the current year. And previous administrations have tried to increase it. As you mentioned, it led the last time that they increased the price of gasoline was 5 years ago or so. And that led into the Bloody Alban.
Bloody November, yeah.
Bloody November. Oh, thank you. According to Reuters, at least 6,000 people were killed during those protests. And they have been trying to increase the price of gasoline for the past 5 years, but people have been resisting. And it is very interesting that Iranian people have found a way to leverage economy to pressure the regime. This is very smart. You have to give them credit. And nonetheless, the government, especially, because of the maximum pressure policy, is under lots of pressure. They cannot continue subsidizing the gasoline at this rate. So they are planning to increase the gasoline price. And when they do, if and when they do, and because of maximum pressure, they probably will in the current year. And that can ignite the next round of protests. But I also want to mention that Iranian people have been, especially after the woman life freedom movement, they have been very smart about protests. They have been picking and choosing the moments. They try to find the right opportunity to do protests. So we do see protests happening every day, or at least every week. Nonetheless, we are probably talking about a nationwide protest. And the next round, I think, would be, which, by the way, will be probably around summer, the
Wow.
next pricing
Something to
increase.
watch out for
Exactly.
economists too and journalists. So let's talk deal or no deal. There's a lot of speculation right now that President Trump could potentially be making a nuclear deal with Iran, but then there's also speculation that maybe U.S. and Israel will join in on a joint military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. I guess to be determined, if you will. So, Mohammed, what would happen to the Iranian rial without a deal and after a potential strike, either by Israel or by the US and Israel together?
The reality of Iran's economy is that the government suppresses the real value of rial. So they try to stabilize it, and they stabilize it by price fixing. Basically, they mandate a price, and they try to hold that price for as long as possible. So basically, any, especially international or regional, shock can contribute to or a decrease, as mentioned before, decrease in their US dollar reserves, because in order to keep the value, the mandated price of the value of real, they have to have U.S. reserves, U.S. dollar reserves, and we know for a fact that the reserves have been in crisis, basically in a very critical situation. So any shock, especially an attack on infrastructure or things like that, can contribute to a very significant price spike, basically. Additionally, Iran has been dealing, unfortunately, this is I completely agree with Mahdi on this point, by the way, because this cannot be even called a tragedy. This is exactly a comedy. Iran has been dealing with gas shortage and electricity shortage. This is basically the shortage of sand in a desert. But that's exactly what happened. And if that attack includes the infrastructure, electricity, or oil and gas infrastructure, then that can completely cripple Iran's industries because, as is, without a war, without an attack, they have been crippled in the past year. And with an attack, Israel only has to attack just a couple of power plants, basically, to cripple all of Iran's industries. Imagine that. So, what I'm saying is the country at the moment is very fragile, uh, which makes you wonder about how detached the Ayatollah is from the reality, basically.
Well, and all of this could potentially, as you both mentioned, potentially lead to uprisings.
Uh, Absolutely, in my estimation, absolutely, that can be that is a very likely outcome. Again, Iranian people are picking and choosing their opportunities. So if they recognize an opportunity, if they see weakness, they can rise up. However, I will also add this that Israel or whoever is thinking about attacking Iran should be very careful about that because that can lead to an adverse effect that could rally people basically to defend their country. So Israel historically has been very careful about their operations basically in Iran. They have done maybe a dozen or more operations at least in the past decade in Iran with zero collateral damage. So they have a very good track record. But I would caution they should be very careful if this is a dangerous area and it cannot necessarily go the way they plan it or lead to the desired outcome, basically.
That's an interesting point, and you're right. Israel has also been very careful with their messaging to the people of Iran, and given their foreign policy, part of it is actually, as they mentioned, the liberation of the people of Iran in their view, at least in terms of how they've presented it, making a difference between the government of Iran and its people. They've been very careful, as you've said, in terms of that, but it could go another way. Do you agree with that, Mahdi?
Yeah, it can go anyway. But in terms of economics, I should say that so uncertainties matter. So when we are in an environment that there are lots of unknown, we cannot predict the future. We cannot predict even the next 2 months if Iran will really start negotiating with Donald Trump or not. So because of these uncertainties, there is a higher risk premium. So risk premium means if you want to invest in an asset, if it is a riskless asset, you do it freely because your asset will not be lost. But if it is a risky asset, it means that it has risk premium. Therefore, if you invest in it, you require and you demand higher outcome, higher yields at the end of the period. So with uncertainties, the risk premium increases. When risk premium increases, then investment gets lower and then the economy gets into turmoil. So this uncertainty, if I want to make a nice example that is understandable, because according to the Iranian statistics, we cannot find many good indicators. But in the US, for instance, if you consider since Donald Trump became the president, he wanted to introduce tariffs. There is a huge amount of uncertainties about trade policy, about tariffs, about future of U.S. relation in terms of trade with other countries. That kind of uncertainty reduced, or let's say, it led to a decline in the U.S. stock market. So imagine a less resilient country, a less resilient economy like Iran. It is very much volatile. It is very much vulnerable to such risks. So if anything happens, if more bad news come up, and even if the Israel attack somewhere in Iran, then the economic turmoil will be even worse and worse. So uh, another point is about Israel attack, because also Mohammed mentioned, if Israel wants to attack any nuclear facility, that should be a no-go, because the problem is that if they attack nuclear facilities, the radioactive uh, pollution could harm the country forever, or who could harm the region forever. So I hope we don't go into that direction. I hope they do something else. They disable another potential for Iranian nuclear capabilities rather than bombing it.
If I may, on your point about Israel's policy, that exactly has been the case. And I think Iranian people know this. Iranian people appreciate that. And especially when you compare that to the approach of, for example, the European Union. European Union consistently pretends to favor Iranian people, but deals in effectively with the with the Islamic Republic regime and conflating the two. But when it comes to Israel, it's the exact opposite. And that is absolutely one of the reasons that Bibi Netanyahu is so popular in Iran. I always make the example that if we have an election today, he would win, Netanyahu would win in Iran by a landslide against any basically candidate. Uh, and
Well, yeah, they make the joke in
e-
Israel that he's more popular in Iran than he actually is in Israel. That's the joke there too.
uh, Actually, there is some element of truth maybe in that, even because in any case, he always consistently makes the distinction between the regime and Iranian people and addresses them accordingly and respectively. And people truly appreciate that. And I hope that is at least a ground for future cooperation, friendship to come between the two great nations.
Now, U.S. Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent recently said, and I quote, "If I were an Iranian, I would get all my money out of the real right now." Mati, first you and then Mohammed, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, it made great sense because since then I think real depreciated a lot. And it makes a great sense because in Iran, because interest rate that the bank, if you want to save your money in the bank, you get 23, 24% per year. And the inflation is currently 35%. It was more than 40% much before that. But it means that the real interest rate is negative. So if you invest your money in the bank, you will lose. You will lose by about 15%. But if you change your money into dollars and euros, you can keep it not only safe, but also increases in value. This is the same also for gold because gold prices are increasing. The value of gold is being increased because of, again, uncertainties about around Trump's policies. Uh, Global gold prices are increasing. And in addition to that, real is depreciating. So if Iranians invest in gold or foreign exchanges, it will be in their own benefits.
And Mohammed, your reaction to that?
Uh, I too would absolutely agree with that. In fact, I've been an advocate of that for a number of years now, and advising at least uh, my people who follow me on social media and such exactly that. And we see, of course, the reaction of the regime to that. They ban, they limit all sorts of investment in US dollars, in foreign currencies in general. They have been tightening their grip on exchange of gold as well. And at the same time, they've been investing in gold themselves. And you see that the Central Bank of Iran effectively has become, they are actually selling gold coins for a long time now. And that has been one of the policies of the government, which is a very, it makes sense, of course, economically, but uh, I would say i- i- it's not basically the government should not be in the business of uh, making benefit from selling gold to its own people, but they sell gold at a high premium. So basically, they are selling at a very high price. As the result, we see an increase in investment in cryptos in Iran. So basically, millions of Iranians try to buy cryptos. Again, last year, the government that tried to fight that. They made it illegal to buy crypto in Iran, so at least to pay or buy it legally. But people continue to do that. And it is a reality. Of course, the government also they try to encourage people to invest in Tehran Stock Exchange as well, uh, which people who have done so by the suggestion of previous presidents, it has been ruinous for many people. So, especially at the current situation, we wouldn't. I would never recommend that. Uh, so it is absolutely a reality.
That's fascinating. Let's talk more about cryptocurrency in Iran. Could that be a potential economic alternative for Iranian people in terms of A, undermining the clerical establishment, and B, allowing the Iranians to have economic liberation, so to speak?
Yeah, if there's a situation in which we would like to, foreign countries, foreign governments would like to support Iranian society in terms of their movement, if they want to make strikes, if they want to make a very nationwide strike in the market and losing their jobs. So the safest, or let's say the tool to support them financially, is through these crypto. Although Iran is under sanction, and because of that, it is impossible to legally find a crypto account or a wallet, a crypto wallet abroad, exactly because Iran is under sanctions. But still, there are some ways that we can circumvent that when we can get people connected to the cryptocurrencies in Iran. So that's the one way to support Iranian nation if the governments would like to do that.
I completely agree. And I've been advocating this for years now that the best way to fight the Islamic Republic regime is sanctions can immensely contribute, and sanctions can recognize this situation, and sanctions can allow, for example, the KYC policies that they can allow micro accounts for Iranian people. They can recognize, and it can have multiple benefits uh, for the free world, to allow to recognize Iranian people's sovereignty, basically to be able to hold and exchange and trade in cryptocurrency. And I think this is truly the best way to fight the regime. And the only way, by the way, the only way that the regime cannot really and they have legislations against it. Of course, they already have legislated that any basically trade of goods doing cryptocurrency by anything basically other than the coin of the country is illegal. Nonetheless, Iran has one of the biggest black markets in the world. Effectively, almost anything, many things in Iran, in other words, are illegal, and people nonetheless trade those goods. And from alcoholic beverages to playing cards, even. And so people are used to trade in black markets. And if they are provided with the infrastructure, or basically recognized with the rights to have micro accounts to trade with cryptocurrency, that can change the situation greatly for Iranian people.
I mean, we talk about maximum pressure in terms of foreign policy, but it looks like maximum pressure is not going to have the intended effect that it should without maximum support for the Iranian people, and this being one example of that. Let's talk about hyperinflation. That seems to be obviously one of the biggest issues in Iran right now, and it's affecting a certain socioeconomic class in Iran that the Iranian government claims to be part of their, support base. What is it going to do to their so-called support from this certain level of, socioeconomic society who are going to be hurting the most, obviously. Mahdi, we can start with you.
Yeah. So the problem is that there's a huge amount of population that are working for the government. So according to the statistics, it's about 30%, only about 30% of the whole population that is working officially. So it means that 70 other percent are either in pension or younger, or they cannot find job, they are completely out of labor force, or they are working in informal economy. So it means that they are earning much, much less. So it means that the whole population is dependent only on 30% of population. So out of those 30% of population, I believe about 70 to 80% are working for the government or for public positions. They don't need to be necessarily loyalists to the regime, but they are working as normal employees of the government. Out of so let's say it was 30% of the population, and out of that was 80% who are working for the government. Some of them are loyalist. I don't know how much in percentage, but let's say elections could show us and tell us who are the loyalists and who are the ones that are supporting the government. So if we accept the statistics of the turnout that was around 30% or 33%, then that is the amount of loyalists who are being employed by the government and being employed by other branches of the state. So their salaries have been increasing, as I explained, less than the inflation. But the budget tells us the increase in the budget is much, much more for specific pillars of the government, like military, like intelligence service, like propaganda machines, the many propaganda machines like the ones that are in the mosques or in Qom or in many other clerical cities. So the budget of those entities have increased much, much more than inflation. So it means that they are completely supporting their base support. So it means that the rest of the society who are not loyalist and who are not part of these specific trinity of states. By trinity, I mean military, propaganda, and clerical. So if they are not part of that trinity, then their salaries have been reduced tremendously in the past years, and that's exactly why the turnout, if we believe in the statistics that they provide, the turnout has been the lowest in the past election.
Well, that's fascinating. And Mohammed, can you give us a little bit of a history lesson? What was the Iranian currency like just before the revolution, at the start of the revolution, and then most recently?
Well, around the revolution, $1 was about 7 tuman or 70 rial. After that, of course, they tried to keep it at that rate. And again, as I mentioned before, by throwing money basically at it to try to hide basically the free fall, which at that point it wasn't a free fall, it was a decrease. But eventually, over the years, they continued that policy instead of improving or strengthening real. Instead of investing in the infrastructure, investing in opening up basically Iran's economy or growing Iran's economy, Iran's economy, they continued because they had abundant uh, oil revenues. And we are talking about, early 80s. Price of oil was about, if I'm not mistaken, by today's standard, more than 110, $120 a barrel. And they already had some reserves left from the before revolution from the monarchy, and so they could do anything. Basically, the world was their oyster, and that is exactly why they didn't care. They thought they could continue at this rate forever, but that's not how it turned out and unfolded. Of course, the population of Iran exploded during, as is the case during any war in any or such climates in any country. So eventually, Riyal started to drop. And another contributing factor, I would say, is that they never cared about uh, fiscal responsibility. Never cared about it. Never abide by the rules and regulations of how you should put together a budget. They never cared about it. They thought they could spend as much as they wanted, and this trend continued until recently, when President Pezeshkian. Let me start a president earlier. When President Raisi came to power, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the price of the U.S. dollar was less than 30,000. So we started at 7. By President Raisi, it was 28,000, less than 30. Uh, and President Raisi, of course, died on the job. When Pezeshkian came to power, the price of dollar was uh, about 50, less than 60,000. So almost doubled, or at least, or fell in half. And when President Trump came to power, it was at that point it was about 80,000, and at the moment is 104, 105,000. Uh, I hope these numbers, and by the way, unfortunately, when we are dealing with a hyperinflated or inflated economy of Iran, and numbers are inflated as well, it's very difficult to keep track of them, and but nonetheless, that's the reality.
Wow. And Matty, we'll just conclude with you going back to what we first started talking about, that, the people of Iran are struggling to even eat. Where do you see this all going?
So the situation is unbearable for many Iranians. So I should say, um, if you consider and if you confirm and believe in the statistics that the government provides, I said only 30% of population is working, meaning that 70 other percent are not. In addition, about 2, 3 years ago, there was some statistics provided by the ministry, which said about 33% of Iranians are under absolute poverty. If you consider the inflation that was erupting in the past 2, 3 years, and also in the past 7 years, and also the lack of finding jobs, bad business conditions, the huge amount of exchange rate depreciation, you would understand that the poverty rate should be even beyond that 33%. It could be even above 50 to 60%, because according to some other statistics, 60% of Iranians cannot get and absorb the per capita calories that they need. So it means that the society is now the poorest across the past 50 years. People cannot tolerate, and people cannot uh, go to the streets because they know they could be shot, they could be imprisoned, they could be killed. What the society needs now is, I should say, a coalition of opposition that could systematically work together for one goal, for one aim, to mobilize the society, to lead them on the streets. If there are 1 million, if there are 5 million, 10 million people on the streets, the government cannot shoot all of them. If they do, they would immediately turn into more and severe violence. So the best strategy for the society is just to wait for leadership or to mobilize themselves. But according to infrastructure that they don't have, it's far reached. And I hope that opposition leaders could join together to lead the society into that direction.
Thank you so much to you both for joining us on Eye for Iran today. That's Mahdi Ghodsi in Vienna and Mohamad Machine Chian in Pittsburgh.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
If you like this episode, hit the like button. Leave us a comment. We would love to know what you think. The Eye for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both English and Farsi. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.